Chers amis, chers collègues, bonsoir. Merci à vous toutes et tous d'être là, d'être venus. Je suis ravie de vous voir à la 6e réunion de séminaire de l'Institut de philosophie indépendante. Notre association internationale, Institut de philosophie indépendante, est fondée par des philosophes russes qui ont quitté leur pays en désaccord avec la politique militaire des autorités et la guerre en Ukraine. L'Institut a trois missions principales. Il mène des études critiques en philosophie, en sciences humaines et en sciences sociales. Il soutient les chercheurs qui ont été contraints de quitter la Russie. Il développe des projets de recherche conjoints avec des collègues du monde entier. Nous cherchons des réponses aux questions globales suivantes. Quelle est la logique historique et sociopolitique des événements qui déroulent sous nos yeux? Quel rôle jouent les écoles et traditions philosophiques nationales dans le monde contemporain? Quelles pourraient être les contributions de la communauté universitaire pour sortir de la crise actuelle? Aujourd'hui, c'est la 6e rencontre de notre cycle de séminaires. Le séminaire est aussi en direct sur Zoom. La série de séminaires s'appelle « Les outils philosophiques dans l'analyse des défis contemporains ». Pourquoi? Depuis le siècle des Lumières et célèbre débat sur les philosophies populaires, la philosophie a été plusieurs fois confrontée à la question de son utilité auprès dans l'âge public et à la question de la capacité à fournir des réponses aux défis contemporains. Est-ce que cette philosophie populaire peut conserver son caractère systématique? Ou bien il doit se réinventer méthodologiquement pour résoudre des problèmes spécifiques. Au regard de la perspective d'aujourd'hui, cette question semble plus pertinente que jamais. En plus, les complexités des problèmes posés par les crises politiques, économiques et existentielles menacent la stabilité des structures démocratiques et provoquent des changements sociaux rapides. D'une part, nos séminaires visent à appliquer les outils philosophiques pour analyser une diversité de problèmes interdisciplinaires contemporains. Cela englobe les évolutions récentes et en cours dans les domaines sociaux et politiques, ainsi que les découvertes scientifiques et les tendances culturelles. D'autre part, il s'agit d'étudier les phénomènes du monde moderne et les replacer dans le contexte de l'histoire de la philosophie. Cet objectif est également une tentative de répondre à la critique croissante selon laquelle la philosophie contemporaine s'intéresse principalement à des problèmes abstraits, détachés des questions de la vie réelle. Nombre de nos sujets sont associés à la Russie, car les événements survenus depuis février 2022 ont beaucoup influencé le paysage politique et intellectuel international. Aujourd'hui, nous sommes en présence de Madame Daniela Steila. Madame Steila est professeure d'histoire de la philosophie à l'Université de Turin. Sa recherche universitaire se concentre sur les philosophies russes des 19e et 20e siècles, en particulier le marxisme et le matérialisme russe, la philosophie de Tchadaev, Vygotsky, Mamardashvili, Zinoviev, et sur la réception de traditions philosophiques d'Europe occidentale dans les contextes russes et soviétiques. Son intervention aujourd'hui s'appelle « L'image de la Russie comme exception dans l'histoire et la culture européenne, dans l'acceptation d'un destin à la revendication d'une mission ». Daniela, je cède parole à vous. Merci.
Merci beaucoup. Bonsoir à tous et toutes. Je voudrais tout d'abord remercier l'Institut de philosophie indépendante, en particulier le cher collègue Julia Zineoka pour l'invitation. C'est un honneur d'être ici ce soir, plus en général, de participer aux activités de l'Institut qui sont si importants dans la situation actuelle des études philosophiques autour de la Russie. Je m'excuse de ne pas continuer à parler en français. Mon français est un peu approximatif. Et enfin, il m'est plus facile de parler en anglais. Et naturellement, dans la conversation qui suivra, nous pouvons mélanger les langues, parler en français, anglais, russe, même peut-être en italien, si vous voulez. So the title of my contribution today is what you can see in my slide, and Julia already mentioned. I am a historian of ideas, so my approach is almost inevitably historical. I will consider some key moments when the issue of Russian exceptionalism was discussed in the 19th and 20th century. And in the second part of my talk, I will dwell on the narrative of Russian exceptionalism in contemporary ideology in Russia today. The idea that Russia represents something specific and original, often mysterious, has crossed more than 2 centuries of intellectual history, emblematically summarized in Tchaikovsky's very well-known verses. Russia is an immense geographical and cultural space, at the same time part of Europe and not. And Europe has been considered the rule, the measure of normativity, to which Russia has been seen as an exception. Of course, the problem of national identity is not specific to Russia. In the whole of Europe, it became a central issue with the German Romanticism, which had a specific fate in Russia, nurtured by the Francophobia that followed Napoleon's invasion. The idea of narodness, which can be seen as a sort of translation of the German Volkstum, the people's character, famously entered Uvarov's slogan, orthodoxy, autocracy, narodnost. Sergei Uvarov wrote to the Tsar in 1833, emphasizing the main principles of his own action as a minister. He pointed out that, unquote, quote, amidst the general collapse of religious and civic institutions in Europe, despite the extensive spread of destructive principles, Russia has happily maintained a warm faith in certain religious, moral, and political concepts exclusively belonging to it. End of quote. Russia specifically will allow it to sail the Russian specificity will allow it to sail the tumultuous oceans of history by keeping faithful to its own peculiar principles. Uvarov explains that narodnost is not about going back or stopping. It does not require immobility in ideas. According to a romantic organicist view, narodnost is the principle that guarantees the identity of a certain organism throughout its development. In Uvarov's words, quote, statehood, like the human body, changes appearance as it ages. Traits change with years, but physiognomy should not change. End of quote. Among the traits that will save Russia from the ongoing European catastrophes, Uvarov pointed out religious values and political institutions, orthodoxy and autocracy, not language or habits, typical romantic ideas. But in Russia, language or habits, were sort of problematic, since the elite did not share either one or the other with the narod. It is significant that the text, which more than any other since its publication in 1836, helped defining the conceptual framework of the discussion about Russian identity, was originally written in French. Pyotr Chadaev's first philosophical letter described Russia as different from any other country. Those things are very familiar to most of you, but just to remind everybody, Russians have no roots. They are nomads, estranged from themselves. Thanks to a culture based upon importation and imitation, Russia had no development, no tradition. Chadaev's judgment was adamant, quote, alone in the world, We have given nothing to the world, taken nothing from the world, bestowed not even a single idea upon the fount of human ideas, contributed nothing to the progress of the human spirit, and we have distorted all progressivity which has come to us, end of quote. Russian exceptional status here is due to weakness and limitations. It is possible that by the time he published the first letter, Chadaev had already changed his mind. For sure, in his following work, The Apology of a Madman, written around 36-37, he drew different conclusions from the idea that Russia was a country without a history. Being a blank sheet of paper, Russia could build its future by taking advantage of the European experience. Russia's mission, however, was still seen as a continuation of European traditions, which had been betrayed by recent turmoil in Europe. Russians, quote, are called upon to resolve most of the problems in the social order, to accomplish most of the ideas which arose in the old societies, to make a pronouncement about those very great questions which preoccupy humanity, end of quote. Slavophiles and Westernizers, if we want to use the names that emerged in the debates of the 30s and 40s, reacted differently to the crisis described by Chadaev in terms of uprooting and nomadism. According to the Slavophiles, the problem concerned not the whole of the Russian people, but only educated society. Alexei Khomyakov reproached Chadaev for not being able to see in religion, inherited from Byzantium and defended against both Islam and the papacy, the core of that history and those traditions of which he denied the existence in his first letter. He wrote, quote, one has to know only the history of the Salon to be unjust up to this point, end of quote. Educated society, informed by a foreign culture, detached itself from the people, unconscious custodian of traditions, so much so that, quote, knowledge appeared in the higher estates, but the knowledge completely detached from life. In the lower estates appeared a life never ascending to consciousness, end of quote. It was therefore necessary to consciously return to the people and their tradition, to the fathers' religion, which had been weakened by European influences. According to the Slavophiles, the West was characterized by individualism and nationalism, which broke the spontaneous cohesion of the community and replaced it with an artificial system of external norms. Russia had a different history and a different fate. Quote, Russian society has grown uniquely and naturally under the influence of a single inner conviction, educated by the church and by tradition, end of quote. Russian culture had a completely opposite character compared to that of Europe. Ivan Kirievsky emphasized the superiority of Russia, since there one found, quote, the predominant inclination toward the integrity of existence, internal and external, public and private, speculative and practical, artificial and moral, end of quote. In this perspective, religion too was interpreted in an original way, in particular in a strongly communitarian way. Alexei Khomyakov posed the specificity of Orthodox religion as a community united by love. He maintained that, quote, this feature sharply divides Orthodox doctrine from all the others, from the Latin one, which stands on external authority, and from Protestantism, which isolates the individuals and leads them to freedom in the desert of intellectual abstraction, end of quote. Khomyakov connected the communitarian principle of Orthodox religion with the tradition of the peasant commune, which the Slavophiles praised as the fundamental institution of social, economic, and cultural life in Russia, capable of saving the peasants from the risk of proletarianization that would come with the introduction and development of Western capitalism in Russia. In the rural community, there was the same harmony of individuals that expressed itself as a spiritual communion in the Orthodox Church. Russia, which had preserved these principles throughout history, was thus, quote, their representative for the whole world. That is its calling, its destiny in the future. We are allowed to look ahead boldly and fearlessly, concluded Khomyakov. The persistent tradition of the agrarian commune in Russia, from a sign of backwardness with respect to the historical European path, became a guarantee of advantages, not only according to the Slavophiles. Westernizers like Alexander Herzen and Nikolai Chernyshevsky pointed precisely to the commune as the foundation of a possible Russian way to socialism in Russia and conveyed such a belief to the entire populist movement. Russia's uniqueness in relation to Europe became a possible advantage for Russia and ultimately for the whole of humanity. In the words of Viktor Prugavin, quote, if Western Europe brought into the world and fought for the rights of individualism and freedom, the Russian people perhaps is the first who are destined to realize in their life the idea of brotherhood and humanity, end of quote. While for the Slavophiles, Russian exceptionality was represented by its radical alterity of values and culture compared to the West, Westernizers and populists conceived a difference of paths, a Sonderweg, which would lead Russia to the common goal of socialism. The ultimate horizon here remains enlightenment and universalism. The idea of Russia's uniqueness in terms of its irreducible opposition to the rest of the world was openly expressed by Nikolai Danielevsky in his work Russia and Europe in 1869. He rejected the Hegelian idea of a universal course of history and supported a scientific approach to the study of civilizations. He distinguished different types, from ancient Egypt to Roman, Germanic, or European civilization, each with its own specific religious, cultural, and institutional principles, and singled out a totally different one, the Slavic civilization, of which Russia was heir, interpreter, and leader. In this way, Danielevsky distanced himself from the Slavophiles, who, imbued with German idealism, conceived a kind of common destiny for humankind, which was the responsibility of the slaves to realize. According to Danielevsky, quote, such a task does not exist at all, end of quote. On the contrary, the ultimate fate of Slavic civilization could not be realized without, quote, a long repeated struggle with Europe, end of quote, which implied the expulsion of every foreign element from Slavic culture. Danielevsky observed that in order to compensate for centuries of embracing everything European and disdaining everything Slavic, one could expect a hostility to everything European and glorification of everything Slavic that would exceed, quote, the due measure of justice and transform itself into exceptionalism and patriotic fanaticism, end of quote. Later he said, quote, in order to strengthen a tree that the wind has long bent in one side, you need to forcibly bend it to the other, end of quote. The ultra-conservative thinker Konstantin Leontiev took from Danielevsky the idea of the independent development of different civilizations, each of which, as an organism, goes through a first phase of undifferentiated homogeneity, which develops in the flourishing complexity of its mature phase and then decays into dissolution. Europe was already in this latter stage, while Russia could still be saved by the autocracy. Once it became a Neo-Byzantine Orthodox empire with the conquest of Constantinople, Russia would finally reject the cancer of equality and democracy that was destroying Europe. The isolationist view was opposed by the idea that the exceptional destiny of Russia was to save Europe itself, as formulated famously by Dostoevsky in his Pushkin speech on June 8, 1880 in Moscow. Pushkin, he claimed, expressed, quote, our belief in our Russian individuality, our now conscious faith in the people's power, and finally, the belief in our future individual destiny among the family of European nations, end of quote. Considering this universalistic mission of the Russian people, quote, all our Slavophilism and Westernism is only a great misunderstanding, even though historically necessary. To a true Russian, Europe and the destiny of the whole mighty Aryan race is as dear as Russia itself, as dear as the destiny of their own native country. This is so because our destiny is universality, won not by the sword, but by the strength of brotherhood and our fraternal aspiration to reunite humankind. End of quote. To the Russian people, Dostoevsky attributed a moral superiority compared with the European decadence. Quote, the Russian soul, the genius of the Russian people, maybe, are the most able of all the nations to contain within itself the idea of the unity of the whole of humankind, brotherly love, a sober view that forgives its enemies, distinguishes and excuses the different, removes contradictions, end of quote. The goal was, again, the great general harmony, quote, the final brotherly communion of all nations in accordance with the law of the gospel of Christ. In 1860, Dostoevsky had called such a notion the Russian idea. While opening the subscription campaign of the journal Vremya for the following year, he recognized Russia's difference from Europe, but at the same time emphasized Russia's connections with the whole of humankind, foreseeing, quote, that the character of our future activity must be common to all of humanity, that the Russian idea perhaps will be a synthesis of all the ideas that with such tenacity, with such courage, Europe develops in its single nationalities, that perhaps everything that is marked by enmity in these ideas will find reconciliation and further development in the character of the Russian people, unquote. In 1888, Vladimir Solovyov elaborated the same concept in a talk presented in a salon in Paris and published in his homeland only in 1909. There, he interpreted Russia's unifying mission as the ecumenical union of the Christian churches. According to Solovyov, quote, the idea of a nation is not what it thinks of itself in time, but what God thinks of it in eternity. It is the organic function that a nation must fulfill in the universal life of humanity, and it is eternally fixed in God's plan. In his words, again, quoted, the Russian idea, Russia's historical duty, asks us to acknowledge our solidarity with the universal family of Christ, end of quote. The topic kept a central position in Russian thought in 19th and 20th century and continued to be discussed before and after the World War and the Revolution of 1917. In 1946, it was powerfully relaunched in the West with the publication in Paris of The Russian Idea by Nikolai Berdyaev. As one of the main figures of Russian immigration after 1922, Berdyaev, as many others, interpreted the problem of Russian identity as a problem of personal identity as well. The thinkers expelled from Bolshevik Russia claimed to be the heirs of authentic Russian culture, the culture of religious inspiration, persecuted in their homeland. It was precisely in the tradition of the Russian universalist mission already outlined by Dostoevsky and Solovyov that Russian immigrants found their role within the secularized European culture, where they aimed at disseminating their original and rich spirituality. An essentialist approach emerged among emigre philosophers, according to which the analysis of Russian thought should not focus on text, circumstances, influences, but mainly on the formulation of criteria in conformity with which one could establish what was authentically Russian. In this way, it became possible to distinguish a true Russian philosophy from what would be just the result of external influences, simple reproduction of foreign forms, if not a betrayal of the Russian identity and mission. In particular, Berdyaev formulated a sort of essentialism that Keremur, and this very important, interesting book, Reformulating Russia, defines as chaotic, since the essence of the Russian spirit, in fact, combines opposite and contradictory characters. In Berdyaev's words, despotism and hypertrophy of the states versus anarchism and liberty, cruelty and violence versus kindness, humanity and gentleness, a ritualistic faith versus a quest for truth, individuality and the clear recognition of personality versus anonymous collectivism, nationalism and pride versus universalism and pan-humanity, religious messianic eschatology versus outward piety, search for God versus rebellious atheism, humility versus insolence, slavery versus rebellion, end of quote. Going further, he implied, contradiction is a problem to be solved only if we think according to Western rationalism, while the Russian spirit welcomes and overcomes antinomies in the fullness of intuition and feeling. According to Lev Karsavin, who devoted to these questions one of his last works published in Russia before his forced emigration, a certain indeterminacy was typical of the Russian idea itself, characterized by its potential much more than by its given characteristics. It was, however, clear that, quote, the meaning of our historical existence is not in Europeanization, and it is not the European ideal that is brought before us as our future, end of quote. Nikolai Trubetskoy maintained that the Roman Germanic word, quote, with all its own culture, is our worst enemy, and concluded, we must ruthlessly overthrow and trample upon the idols of social ideals and prejudice borrowed from the West that have guided our intelligentsia's thinking so far. Once we free our thoughts and feelings about the world from oppressive Western blinders, we must draw the elements for the creation of a new worldview from within ourselves in the treasury of Russian national spontaneous spirituality, end of quote. For the Eurasianist movement, of which both Trubetskoy and Karsavin were exponents, it was the geographical and cultural condition of Russia, located between West and East, that explained its originality with respect both to Europe and to Asia. But Eurasianism sought the roots of Russian civilization in Eastern Christianity, as well as in the heritage of the so-called Turanian world and the steppe civilization, mainly to oppose Europe. The problem of the specific identity of Russia, so intensively debated among émigrés at the beginning of the 20th century, came back in the last years of the Soviet era and after the collapse of the USSR. With the end of the Cold War and the breakdown of the ideological pillars of the regime, Russia had to review its position in the world and in history. For decades, Russian exceptionality consisted in the declared realization of socialism against Western capitalism. Now, the discussion moved back to the realm of traditions, values, religion, and thinkers of the past, condemned to oblivion by the Soviet regime. Everybody remembers those books. At the end of the century in particular, to recall the founding values of the Russian spirit helped to strengthen a society that was tired and disappointed by the effect of harsh economic reforms, anguished by political instability, humiliated on international scene. In the 90s, ideas about Russian exceptionalism, civilizational uniqueness, and spiritual mission were no longer the prerogative of small circles of conservatives, but turned mainstream. Émigré philosophers' works were republished as an essential part of Russian cultural and spiritual traditions. Among them, Ivan Ilyin had a particular fortune. Expelled from Bolshevik Russia first, then from Nazi Germany, he lived in Switzerland until 1954 with a ban on political activity. He was a Hegel scholar, a philosopher, a lawyer in politics, a religious thinker, and an enthusiastic proponent of the Russia of the future that was to succeed to USSR after the collapse of the Soviet regime, which Ilyin anticipated. Ilyin's success in Russia in the 90s has been impressive, but not surprising, if we consider that some of his positions, particularly in his more militant writings, must have sounded very appropriate at the time. For instance, and I show some of the covers of the many, many different editions of Nashizadachi, our tasks, for instance, quote, "Every loyal Russian patriot should explain to the foreigners that Russia is not a random clustering of territories and tribes, not an artificially composed mechanisms of regions, but a living, historically grown and culturally justified organism, which can be subject to arbitrary dismemberment." Or, again, quote, "When after the Bolsheviks collapse, world propaganda will throw into the Russian chaos the slogan, 'Peoples of Russia dismember,' there will be two possibilities. Either a Russian national dictatorship within Russia will take the reins of power in its strong hands, will extinguish this disastrous slogan and lead Russia to unity, suppressing all the separatist movements in the country, or such a dictatorship will fail, and an unimaginable chaos of movements, returns, revenges, pogroms, the collapse of transport, unemployment, famine, cold and powerlessness will begin." End of quote. According to Ilyin, Russia could save itself by rejecting Western models and embracing its own culture and values. He wrote, quote, "The West is neither our command nor our prison. Its culture is not an ideal of perfection. We have no salvation in Westernism. We have our ways and our tasks." Ivan Ilyin is very popular in Putin's Russia. In 2005, his remains were repatriated and buried in Moscow. The following year, his archive was acquired. While Putin was prime minister, he went to the philosopher's tomb. In 2021, Putin declared that he keeps Ilyin's works on his bedside table. However, the conclusion that Ilyin would be Putin's philosopher and his inspiration for a fascist turn in Russia, as Timothy Snyder has argued, seems not so well-grounded, according to me. I agree with Marlène Laruelle, who demonstrated this convincingly, and she emphasized particularly that none of Ilyin's pro-fascist texts have been quoted by Putin or by his entourage, and that the ideas they refer to, the fact that Ilyin saw Russians' accents in autocracy, statehood, messianism, cultural exceptionalism, are present in a much wider tradition, as I have tried to point out in this brief, quick survey I just tried to present you. Putin's ideology, Laruelle argue, is diverse and eclectic. In her words, the Russian presidential administration cultivates a plural doctrinal market with a flock of advisors offering several mixed ideological products of public consumption, end of quote. Kevork Oskanyan, in this very interesting book, called hybrid exceptionalism the current Russian view, which insists on Russia's intermediate position between East and West and proposes a bricolage of different historical experiences and elements taken from preceding narratives and ideologies. Putin insisted that Russia has its own values since his ideological program on the eve of his appointment as Yeltsin's replacement. In his manifesto, Russia at the Turn of the Millennium, He rejected any restoration of a state ideology, but emphasized at the same time that Russians share a spontaneous collectivism, which had to be taken into account. Quote, "It is a fact that in Russia, the desire for collective forms of life has always dominated over individualism. It is also a fact that paternalistic attitudes are deeply rooted in Russian society. Most Russians are used to associating the improvement of their own position, not so much with their own efforts, initiative, enterprise, but with the help and support of the state and the society." End of quote. At that time, Putin avoided any judgment about the moral superiority of Russian values, but he stated that he would not like his country to lose its originality and its identity. In an interview with the American TV channel NBC, he said, "I would like the cultural roots and the spiritual roots of Russia, which we are so proud and so fond of, and which shape us as individuals, to be preserved." End of quote. When Putin was elected president again in 2012, Russian originality was used to formulate in a peculiar way values that were still supposed to be universal. Speaking of democracy, for instance, Putin made it clear that, and I quote, "We share precisely the universal democratic principles adopted throughout the world. However, Russian democracy is the power of the Russian people, with their own tradition of national self-government, not the implementation of standards coming from outside." End of quote. Russia should turn itself to traditional values whose decline he regretted. And I quote, "Mercy, compassion, empathy for one another, support and mutual help, what has always, in all times, made us more stable and stronger, what we have always been proud of." End of quote. The nature of the Russian people also explains the specific role of Russia among all the peoples of the former Soviet Union and Eurasia. In the strategic plan of the Russian Federation in 2012, one reads, quote, "The Russian state was created as a union of peoples, the backbone of which historically has been the Russian people. Due to the unifying role of the Russian people, to a centuries-long intercultural and interethnic reciprocal influence, a unique cultural diversity and spiritual community of different peoples formed on the historic territory of the Russian state. Peoples committed to common principles and values, such as patriotism, service to the fatherland, family, creative work, humanism, social justice, mutual assistance, and collectivism." The following year, Putin referred to Leontiev. Quote, "Russia, as the philosopher Konstantin Leontiev used to say, has always developed as a blossoming complexity, as a state civilization, anchored with the Russian people, Russian language, Russian culture, the Russian Orthodox Church, and other traditional religions of Russia." End of quote. By opposing Western individualism, by sharing the most traditional Orthodox values, by referring to Slavophiles or Eurasianists, Putin's ideological discourse has grown as a patchwork around the idea of Russia as the bearer of a civilization that is not only different, but superior. Russia, in Putin's words, rebels against the role of vassal in a unipolar world and prepares to fulfill its civilizing mission. Russian superiority is not just about values. Nikolai Plotnikov, in an interview that is published in this book, originally in French, but I use the English translation here, Nikolai Plotnikov has observed that Putin, particularly in his speech of 18 March 2014, celebrating the annexation of Crimea, quote, exposed the idea of Russian men exhibiting a superiority that is not only cultural, but also genetic, more resilient, etc. This sociobiological analysis of a people is a legacy of Danilevsky and Gumilyov. Putin provides an aggressive interpretation of Gumilyov's theory of passionnarness, which consider the ability to sacrifice oneself as the most specific manifestation of the energy of the Russian people. Putin considers the passions of the Russian people as the inner nuclear reactor, quote, that allows Russia to move forward and to become stronger, as the promise of Russia's further development. Quote from Putin's words: Russia has not reached its peak. We are on the march of development. Unlike other old or quickly aging nations, we are still on the rise. We are quite a young nation. We have an infinite genetic code. End of quote. Putin's so-called conservative turn is not the desire to come back to the past, but the idea of a future development wholly consistent with fundamental values. Putin quoted Berdyaev on this question, although not completely faithfully. He said, quote, conservatism is not what prevents us from going up and forward, but what prevents us from going back and down into the chaos, end of quote. In a sort of organicist perspective, it is, quote, the historical experience accumulated over the century, the rich cultural heritage and spiritual power potential of Russia that allowed it to take a special place in the world cultural space and created opportunities for the successful promotion abroad of traditional Russian spiritual and moral values, end of quote. A few months later, Putin gave a definition of these traditional values, another one of a series of definitions. He said, quote, traditional values are the moral guidelines that shape the worldview of the Russian citizens, passed down from one generation to the other, the foundation of all Russian civil identity and the single cultural space of the country, which strengthens civil unity and find its unique original manifestation in the spiritual, historical, and cultural development of the multi-ethnic people of Russia, end of quote. An official and updated list of those values follows, quote, life, dignity, human rights and freedom, patriotism, citizenship, service to the fatherland and responsibility for its destiny, high morals ideas, strong family, creative work, priority of the spiritual over the material, humanism, mercy, justice, collectivism, mutual assistance and mutual respect, historical memory, and continuity of generations, unity of the peoples of Russia, end of quote. So on the one hand, specific and original Russian values define Russia's identity and support its strength against the collective West, with a combination of exceptionalism and conservatism. The Russian missions become the defense and the dissemination of values rooted in the past and ultimately in a divine authority external to humanity. On the other hand, because Russia values have a divine sanction, they can claim universal meaning, thereby establishing the global mission of Russia. According to Putin's ideological discourse, Russia is meant to save the whole world from the contagion of the moral catastrophe of the West, manifested by the crisis of traditional family, a more and more respected and outspoken LGBTQ+ community, etc. In his address to the Federal Assembly in 2023, for instance, Putin gave some examples of Western moral collapse. Quote, the destruction of the family, of cultural and national identity, perversion, child abuse, including pedophilia, are declared the norm, in the West, of course, the norm of their life, and clergy and priests are forced to bless same-sex marriages, end of quote. Putin's Russia, particularly after 2012, asserted itself as, quote, a guardian and protector of traditional spiritual and moral values, the spiritual heritage of the world civilization, end of quote. And not only by soft power, if one considers the support that Russia has proved to be giving to European right-wing parties and movements, or Russian interference in the US elections in 2016. If we consider this aspect, Russian exceptionalism does not seem an exception at all. Very often, right-wing parties and groups in Europe and the US, as Fabian has proved in this great chapter in the book Open Society Unresolved, right-wing parties and groups have successfully built on ideas of national exceptionalism and defending their country to claim that they protect the nation against ill-intentioned foreign influences, end of quote. Cooperation between individuals and groups in defense of so-called traditional values in the West and in Russia have been well documented since the late 1990s, from the success of American evangelicals in Russia to the participation of different groups in the World Family Congresses, one of which happened in Moscow, up to the short but interesting Holy Alliance of Values between the Catholic Church of Benedict XVI and the Patriarchate of Moscow. It is very well pointed out in this great book, The Moralist International. Also, the article by Christopher Stroop is very good. A clear example of how Russian exceptionalism can go together with right-wing, even openly fascist positions in Europe is provided by Alexandre Dugin. Len Lerwell showed this clearly in a series of books. Dugin certainly claims the exceptional nature of Russia and its Eurasian destiny, but he combines Eurasianism and Russian conservatism with René Guénon, Julius Evola, and mixes Orthodox tradition with occultism and paganism. Edward Limonov, who was his partner in the National Bolshevik Party, called him the Cyril and Methodius of fascism, since he brought from the West a new faith for our land, the quote. Today, after Russian aggression against Ukraine, official rhetoric repeats the image of a Russia surrounded, fighting against the collective West that is the bearer of moral decadence and anti-religious nihilism. Official ideology claims Russian traditions and values to affirm a new geopolitical role by using without any hesitation a very different and sometimes confused set of ideas. Toward the West, Russia's saving mission is entrusted to the millions of people, quote, who in the West understand that they are being dragged towards a real spiritual catastrophe, end of quote. At the same time, the resumption of well-grounded Orientalist traditions, as Kevork Oskanyan has pointed out, present traditions that were present both in the Russian Empire and in the Soviet Union, allows Russia to claim the role of enlightened leader in the irrational Asian East. Russian isolationism and exceptionalism have been considered particularly dangerous and even deadly by the Russian intellectual community abroad. Recently, Marina Bikova in the Studies in East European Thought has summarized the agenda that Russia will have to face to really change orientations and perspectives, including, quote, to critically reflect on the country's imperial past, free themselves from the myth of Russian exceptionalism, and reject a victim narrative based on national identity, end of quote. That is a very difficult task. As we read in the Russian collection, Facing the Catastrophe, published in Germany in 2023, edited by Nikolai Plotnikov, in front of an ethical, sociological, and anthropological catastrophe, in the words of one of the contributors to the collective volume, quote, we have a long and painful road ahead of us. We will have to learn humanity anew. We will have to change, including our own language and culture, forcing ourselves to descend from the pedestal of exceptionalism, of the Sonderweg, as a sort of holiness granted a priori from above. Since now, all these words taste like death. They smell like Bucha and the other crimes committed in Ukraine by Putin's regime, End of quote. Спасибо за внимание. Thank you. Are you coming here? No, okay. It's just. Hi.
First of all, thank you very much for very interesting talk. I must confess that in the beginning I misunderstood your subject, and then I checked that indeed it was misunderstanding. I thought that you were going to talk about the image of Russian exceptionalist in the Western culture.
No.
And indeed, it's not mostly about the Russian exceptionalist invented by Russian intellectual culture itself. And in fact, when you quote Snyder's article and similar opinions, they, I would say that they challenge the idea of exception, because to say that Russia is a fascist state is to include it in the existing trend of in Western culture. So it's the same thing that to say that Russia is a part of Europe, and it also includes some of its sins. How was, actually I know nothing about that, how was the idea of exceptionalism, of Russian exceptionalism, received in Western Europe? What it's clear that Hungarians are also exceptional, or African Pygmies, they are very exceptional, and it's clear that no parallel is possible. So I think that in Western philosophy and culturology, all these cases must be studied and classified.
Well, this is a fascinating topic that it's not actually what I work on, because I work in Russia, so it's not so much about that. What I can say is that the fact that Russia is somehow different is clear since the report of the first people who went there. And it's not by chance that nowadays some of Marquis de Cousteau or de Maistre are taken back and republished, because they also showed the difference of Russia. However, I think that one thing is the idea that Russia is different, which is present every now and then, let's say, in European culture. And that depends mostly on how universal is the framework of the European culture at the point, how they insist of universal values or not, or national values. But another thing is how Russia present itself, or was considered itself as being or not part of Europe. I can give an example. When finally Western scholars of Russia could go back to discuss with the Russian colleagues after perestroika, more or less, there was a famous meeting where James Scanlon could participate first after so many time, such a long time. He, Balitsky were there. You remember that very well. And James Scanlon said, well, let's be clear. If we compare Russian culture with Indian culture or Chinese culture, it becomes clear that their vocabulary, their concept are still European. It's not like a total different set of concepts. So Russia is a peculiar country, but it's still sort of within the European framework. And the same thing repeated and repeated. One of my teachers, beloved teachers, Franco Venturi, Russia is Europe. What else? How can it be something else? Which doesn't mean that Russia is not different. It is different. It is different and has to be seen in all the differences. It's like, so when we say what I don't like about Timothy Snyder's point, and I like better Marlène Laruelle, is exactly that it's too simple to take what's going on now in Russia and say, oh, this is fascism. I recognize it. Because things are much more complicated and there is a much more Russian there, Russian connections there that we can just, we cannot just avoid. But this doesn't mean, of course, that Russia is totally different. It's still part of a common ground. So it's more, I cannot actually answer your questions about the Western idea of Russian being different in details. I think that one should probably work on that, which is a very interesting idea, considering the European context much more than the Russian characteristic. It says more about us, the fact that we consider Russia more or less equal or different, than it says about Russia itself. But it's not my topic, so I cannot be more specific.
Thank you very much. May I just add
Sure.
something just for improve my understanding? In my view, Russian exceptionalism is not equal to difference, the Russian specificities. It's equal to Russian messianism. When we say about ourselves that we are exceptional, we pretend to be in some intermediate stage between the all other humankind and God. So it's something much more than being just human. That this exceptional role to teach some important lesson, as Lenin said, or to show a way to salvation. Actually, what the examples you saw, this is exactly about that. And the other side of the same question is the existence of the different culture. Say, very near Moscow, there are many Moravas, people of Morava, which is very different. And I remember when I was a student that we were hiking around Moscow region, and we tried to buy some milk from peasants around it. They said no, we have no cars. You must go to Morava. They had cars, so you can buy milk there. And it was my discovery of the existence of this completely different culture very near Moscow. And there are, say, Buryats, which are, I had a friend from Ulan-Ude, she is Jew, and she says that my natural religion is Buddhism because everybody around me were Buddhists. So, what is Russian, and what is the role of not ethnically Russian in Russian culture, and how this pretension to be a teacher, to be a messiah, how it is, what it is for Western culture or for Western thinkers.
So I'm not sure I understood, but I can sort of divide the two different questions. One is about being exceptional and being exceptional as the between the rest of humanity and God. It is actually, I think that one could actually see in the development of this idea in Russia that the beginning is more a recognition of a difference, like the development of an identity that is not necessarily superior at all. It's on the contrary, the difference of a backwardness. Like backwardness can be some advantage, give some advantages at some point, because we arrive late and so we can get all the experience of the humanity before us, but it's still something that it's a destiny. It's not a mission. It's something that happened. It's a condition that Russia is in. But then it develops as a mission. And as far as the mission goes, it becomes exactly the idea of superiority. We are better. Therefore, we can give others ideas. And we are better toward the West. We are better toward the East. We are better toward the other peoples of Russia. And this comes the second part of the question. It's super important, the idea of the imperial nature of these kind of conceptions. If Russia is superior, if Russia has a mission, it means that it has to build an empire. That is clear. And so all the other, yeah, it is interesting how in Putin's quotations, there are references to the other religions of Russia, the other people of Russians, but it's clear that the core, the unity of the state is the Russian people. That is part of the problem. That is one of the things that they have to change in order to go somewhere, because
it's completely fascist.
There are elements of fascism, of course. It's simplistic to say, as you pointed out, this is just the European fascism, because there are differences. But that there is the idea, I mean, the idea that there is a genetic code that Russian are more resilient than all the other people, that is also very, I mean, sounds like the worst we saw in our history. So yeah, there are elements, of course. Thank you. Fascinating. Yeah.
Yes. I think one, of course, it was not your theme, your subject, but one has also to underline that there is in Russia, in Russian philosophy, there is a Western, a European tradition which is quite strong and quite not crazy as
of course
we've heard. And,
of course.
For example, in the very famous publication Vieki, at the beginning of the 20th century, there are very interesting articles about the law, legal tradition, etc.
Of course.
Or articles by Fedotov, all the books by Fedotov in the before the Second World War. I mean, there's this tradition, and I think we in the West should know about it and appeal to it. So this one.
No, absolutely.
And the second thing I wanted to say, even in Western, well, in Europe, even Eastern European countries like Poland or the Czech Republic or the Baltic countries, even when they have right-wing governments, they see what is happening in Russia now with horror.
Yeah, of course.
Horror. I mean, it's not because they are right-wing.
No.
That they have no sympathy for it. It's horror. So
course,
I don't
of course.
believe so far in a sort of conservative traditionalist union with Russia in Europe. So far.
Yeah. No, it's very interesting. About the first thing, the Western European tradition in Russian culture, of course. I mean, I've been studying only that. My work is on materialist, Marxism, Western, the reception of empirical criticism, epistemology. I mean, that's my word. That's the Russia I know and I work on. But they have no idea about it. They didn't have any idea about any kind of exceptionality of Russia. Russia is part of the world and is totally part of the world and has to develop ideas that are connected with the world. So they are out of this narrative. And the reason why I worked a little bit on this topic is because I was pushed by the constant references that comes up to philosophy and philosophical tradition in Putin's speeches, and so I wanted to try to understand where they went and how they connected. The point about the East European countries is obviously very clear. The idea of moralist, the moralist international, is more about the connection with actually the United States and the West, Western Europe.
Oh, yes.
Because I mean, recent we know the Tucker Carlson interview with Putin is part of this weird, very weird connection.
They don't have the same horror.
I know. East European countries obviously they have a memory that is still in their bodies about what it means to have to do with Russia. But it's interesting how an Italian scholar who worked on Russian nationalism, Giovanni Savino, wrote a very interesting work, an essay about the connections of Dugin with Italian right, extreme right wing.
And Dugin is this.
Yeah.
The Dugin sources are French.
Yeah. He is Alain de Benoit aussi. No, it's very interesting, the connections of this kind of culture that goes. So again, things are more complicated, one could say, because a thinker that is considered to be super Russian and pro-Russian, etc., is actually a product of so much of the Western right idea. Ebola, yeah. He's there, is in that company, yeah.
Just a small remark to what you said. I have talked to people who are very conservative and who think that the Russian Messianism is they believe in it, and they said that, and I was interested to know how they consider the other religions, the other peoples who live in Russia, and it's something like if the other people accept the superiority of the Orthodox religion and the Russian people, it's okay.
Yeah.
But they are like Chechnya of Kadyrov, where nobody touch this region. But Russia, but Moscow is has more influence, and it's like a big empire, like the Turkish empire, where there was one dominated one religious who dominates, and the other they could practice, but it's another position. It's something like this, if I understood well this logic of thinking.
Yeah, I think it's it makes sense. I mean, it makes sense. It's a sort of an imperial idea. And these, I was quoting this book that really fascinated me, this book by Oskinian about the exceptionalism, the hybrid exceptionalism. The idea is exactly that that Russia had this sort of put itself like the center of a new network that has different kind of missions, West and East. West is the moralistic mission of bringing back spirituality and values to the decadence and moral catastrophe. On the other hand, the idea, a sort of paternalistic view, like we are you could be yourselves, you could do your rituals, you could do your religion things, but still we are a sort of the center and the best but we allow you to do that. So this sort of it's very much a sort of a paternalistic vision toward the East, much more than toward which is imperial, absolutely, yeah. And one consider how rich is that part of the world in terms of culture and differences, and it's pretty bad, yeah.
Yes, but thank you very much. It was brilliant talk. And about the Soviet philosophical heritage, why Putin never use it, avoid to talk about this, and if it could help for evaluating values of Putinism after?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, it's hard enough to understand what Putin does. Who knows why he does not, but yeah, that's actually a question, because he reevaluated. He had no problem in reevaluating Stalin, and yeah, he has no problem about Soviet Union, the heritage of Soviet Union, but not the culture, not the philosophy.
Never.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
there are professional philosophers who could be used.
Could be used, absolutely. Maybe, I don't know. Now I'm really speculating. I have no idea. I'm not in Putin's head, as the title of that book that I quoted. Maybe, I mean, in this exceptionalist sort of specificity of Russia, etc. narrative, all the Marxism is a bad thing coming from the West. Maybe that is somehow, I don't know. Maybe I give too much credit to and I expect that we could be could see him quoting, I don't know, whoever in Soviet times tomorrow, because the impression is that it is really a patchwork or whatever works. A very postmodern attitude, by the way, which is ironical. Yeah, he's like, whatever, anything goes. Yeah, fire up, poor guy.
Yeah, thank you very much. I have two small questions. One is, why do you think that for Putin, its philosophies, including Turin?
Sorry, couldn't hear.
Yeah, sure. Why do you think that for Putin, philosophy has any importance at all? Why does he want it to serve them? While he could just say that our ideology is different,
No.
without justification. And so, if I may allow the second question.
Of course.
So I was thinking whether exceptionalism can also be positive, because when because the diversity seems to be the condition of possibility for dialogue. And so, what's the definition of this negative exceptionalism? When does it become dangerous?
Okay, good. Thank you. Why, in general, Putin bothers about philosophy? That's a good question. He doesn't bother so much. I mean, his problem is history, obviously. He is obsessed with history. He rewrites history constantly in his own way, philosophy is much less important in this kind of thing, of thinking. But I think that there is, but it is just one part of the answer, because the question is that in the Russian culture, philosophy has a very strong power, a very strong place. It had not now, but historically, everybody had this. Exactly, philosophy was taught everywhere, in every institution, every class, every school had philosophy classes. So in this sense, maybe there was a sort of a heritage of this thing that you cannot really avoid. Philosophy, but his use of philosophy is again totally erratic. He puts together references. Today is Dostoevsky, tomorrow is Leontiev, and then the Slavophiles, and then Zinoviev, and then it's really like a patchwork. It's not so. There are some ideas that it's not totally random, because the idea is that Russia is a strong, best, has values, is moral. But then how I use different quotes to support this thinking, it's really a question of who he talks to, who talked to him, did they die before? Really, it's very random. I don't think he gives so much credit to philosophy. The idea of exceptionalism, considering as a sort of a good one, that I'm not so sure that there is a good one, because the good version of it is diversity, is not about being exceptional. Exceptionalism has two troubles. If one considers the exceptionalism in the sense of being the recognition of a condition, like Chadaev, we are different. It's not good, but we are different. We have to deal with that. We are an exception. Exception comparing to what? You have to have a measure of a sort of a rule to have an exception. It's always implies the idea that there is a normal path and we are a deviation from that path. And this is not a good idea, because the diversity is more the recognition of possibilities that are there, and everyone tries to follow different paths. The other version of it, we are better, so we are exceptional in the sense that we are better. We are obviously has the implication of the mission has obviously the implication of the imperialism included in this. So it implies some sort of imperialism. But even the first version seems to me a little bit controversial, because the good version of it would be just a recognition of diversity as possible and legitimate. I think that Alexandra has raised her hand.
Yes, thank you very much. I would like to thank first of all our speaker for the presentation, very fruitful, very interesting, very actual for the current situation in Russian philosophy and in general. You can hear me? Yes, right?
Yeah, I can hear you. The problem is I'm not sure
nobody else can hear me.
Yeah, exactly. Nobody else can hear you.
Okay, Maga, in this case, probably it would be possible to repeat my question. I don't know.
Yeah. So
okay. So my question is enter somehow in my own field of research, because all of us know, or maybe it's just a famous article of one of the famous philosophers of the first half of the 20th century, Russian, Vladimir Ern, from Kant to Krupp. And recently, literally these days, today or yesterday, there was one of Russian governors who speak out and gave all the blame for the current war with Ukraine to Kant.
Yeah.
And as for you, in your opinion, is a typical situation for Russian mindset, for Russian way of thinking, for Russian philosophy to give all the blame for all the catastrophic events, wars, etc., to Western philosophy, German Kantian philosophy, and take all the merits of the good things, if there are any, on Russian philosophy, and or it's just a coincidence, or the history repeating itself?
Thank you.
Thank you very much
Alexandra.
again.
Thank you. So Alexandra was quoting a situation that happened literally 2 days ago, that I wasn't aware of, but Julia told me the story just before our presentation, and it's a weird story because the governor of Kaliningrad said that the fault of the current situation is
Because of war.
of the war has to be on Kant, because Kant being the founder, I couldn't understand the relationship. Julia very kindly explained to me that it is because Kant is the founder of the Western values. Therefore, Putin was forced to attack Ukraine because he had to fight Kant and his Western values. This seems to me very extreme. I mean, I was really in, yeah, and you also quoted Ern from Kant to Krupp, because it is this kind of ideas, but I don't know, it seems sometimes there are patterns of interpretation that become sort of as pattern, things that people can just use, and maybe you know, a willing chinovnik decides to be even better and makes it more extreme or something.
Exactly, but Putin told, I don't know, a couple of months ago about Kant also, but he used it the opposite way. He told that according to Kant, we need to use our own mind, and so Kant is needed for us. I don't know.
So yeah, this seems actually extreme. One thing I would like to comment though on your question about, I don't think there is any specific pattern of exceptionalism or Slavophilism or whatever in the Russian mentality, simply because I don't believe that Russian mentality per se exists. There are situations, elements, context, influences in Russia as in any other place in the world, and people react and discuss and hopefully come to common conclusions, sometimes not, but it's part of what we are in. So for sure, this is not something specific of Russia per se. Is something that unfortunately is specific of the dominant views of the power in this moment in Russia. And I really hope that this is not Russia. And the fact that, I mean, you, Sasha, or you, Julia, or a lot of people around here are the proof that can be different.
Thank you, it's true.
But there is a tradition in old Muscovy that you shouldn't speak with foreigners and diplomats, Western diplomats, when they met dignitaries in Moscow. The Tsar or the dignitary they wash their hands after the hands have been shaken by the foreigner. So, okay, we are not in the 16th century, but still there is this past.
Oh yeah, well,
which never existed in the West.
Yeah, but one could say also that, I mean, there are many countries, many places where people have been deceived and treated very badly by the Western countries. So it may be also some sort of sense, let's say.
No, but
yeah, no, of course, they don't trust the,
but in Western Europe.
Yeah, they don't,
you could speak with the foreigner.
Yeah.
Any peasant could speak with the foreigner.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, Russia, it is not allowed.
Yeah.
So there's this long tradition.
Yeah, no, well,
maybe.
Yeah, in a very different way, I have experienced this other aspect of this attitude toward the foreigners. I'm a scholar of Russian culture. I have no Russian roots whatsoever. I have no relationship, family relationship, nothing. I'm a foreigner and I'm studying Russian. And I had always to explain myself and prove myself, because the attitude was
Откуда вы знаете русский язык?
Откуда вы знаете русский язык? Кого вы знаете вообще? And also the idea was, I mean, it's interesting. You are a foreigner. In spite of that, you got something. Like, yeah, thank you. It's literally, even friends, even people who appreciated my work and really helped me in many, many ways. They had this attitude, like, oh, and the best compliment a Russian can say, свой человек. That's really when you get that, that is really something. There is this idea that Russia can be understood by people that are not Russian. There is something that, and maybe the part of the fascination that we had, and many of us had about Russia, is also because it's such a specific word, such a wonderful, warm, bizarre word, and we just want to go back.
It's strange. It's true. Somehow it's true. Unfortunately, but I remember once my husband was in Moscow and we took a car just there to go somewhere, and the guy who was driving, he told, oh, he's foreign. I told, yes, he's French. And he told, oh, sorry, but I have another car. It's not so modern and so new, but you know, it's not the only car I have. So it's also
you have to, the relationship with foreigners.
I was wondering, this exceptionalism we are speaking about so much, and which you seem to not being sure it's good or it's bad.
Tendentially bad, I think bad.
I mean, it seems to me that exceptionalism has to be taken as obviously the best and the more mindful and so on. But it seems to me that it will never become a mission and messianism if you don't have this policy of very mindful movers. That's the great difference, I think, with Russia. In Russia, there was always a very, very, very strong ruler who could do what he wants. And with Putin now it's the same, and he just plays with philosophers and with quoting very smart people and thinkers, but the main thing is he can do what he wants.
It's very sad. Maybe, yeah, there is some, obviously it is true. To be fair, there is a tradition also of messianism that is not powerful messianism. Like, I mean, Dostoevsky, he was thinking, is it then possible or not, another question. But his ideas was a sort of a embracing universal messianism. It was like the idea that it was a power that was a spiritual power, not a secular power. So in that sense, the idea was a messianic idea, but really a religious messianic idea, not so much a powerful idea. So in terms of ideas, there was also this possibility of a messianism that wasn't just imperial. And all the historical realization are exactly, as you said, are imperial, are strong and powerful. And
I would tend to think that the fact that religion is at the core of all this narrative is probably the source where the messianism idea comes from. And, and probably imperialism follows them, right? So people, let's say, stay fans into the spirituality and stuff like that, very close to the Christianism and the religion. But yet, when you drive this into politics, and you drive to imperialism by that.
I think, it makes a lot of sense, unfortunately.
And I think that, for instance, the idea that, for instance, Moscow is a third Rome, for instance, is really at the core of this way of thinking.
Yeah. And it's also ambiguous in a way, because that, again, the idea Moscow third Rome is at the same time the emphasizing the role as the global ruler of Moscow, and also putting it into a tradition that is, again, a global tradition, the one global tradition of the entire world. So this is not exceptional at all. It's on the contrary, the position themselves in the great history of the global world.
Just to emphasize the non-exceptionalism of exceptionalism, as said, the United States has a very strong notion of American exceptionalism, which is about superiority in the mission of the world. It becomes an imperial power eventually. The British Empire, the English think of themselves as exceptional, an island that isn't even Europe. Perhaps it's just the latest technology. This is a long historical idea. They too become an empire with a mission to bring civilization to the world. So the non-exceptionalism of exceptionalism and its tendency to lead toward empire is very, dare say, universal.
Yeah.
And sad.
Yeah.
But I would say that any empire, it's first of all, it's the idea of hierarchy. So you must arrange different sovereignties in a structure with the superiority of the one nation. So there's, as Hudson wrote, that the imperial idea is very international, but with the hierarchical structure of nations. So I think that in this sense, the Russian Federation is an imperialistic state. I'm not sure that it could be called empire. It's a disputable question, but nevertheless, it has strong imperialistic component. In this, it's very similar, very much like any other empires. Any other empire. In this as well.
Yeah, I would object, but it's not. I'm not sure. It's complicated, but I think it's still America or the British or even French.
Sure, you were an empire.
I think we have an idea of law that is of an order which is which can be adopted by or even if it's also the strongest which in charge of the law, but still There is this idea of something not arbitrary. Law. And in Russia,
This is a
this
problem.
tradition doesn't exist.
Yeah, well,
I mean, the world, the present world is organized, still is organized, whether it's the United Nations, there are things and treaties, etc., etc. And the Anglo-Saxons respect law, or they try to use law to prove their point. But I mean, through the law, I think this is a big difference.
And empires are very fashionable now.
The idea of law, legist idea, it's Roman idea initially. And the Roman Empire, it also implied the variety of laws, system. Roman law for Romans and Salic rules for barbarians. And this is also law in this sense. And one of the prominent Russian sinologue, Tian Yaoshan, she challenged the thesis that the Chinese grammar doesn't exist. She argued that the Chinese grammar exists, but it's hidden. And the principal book was called The Hidden Chinese Grammar. And in this sense, the Russian law is hidden. So it exists, but it was never written. And you know, the Stalin's constitution, nobody accepted it as a truth. It was just a decoration at Potemkin's village, and everybody understood. As I can judge, everybody understood that. And in this sense, that law, written law, doesn't exist. As you said, the truth which is said becomes wrong. So in this sense, the law which is written becomes illegal.
Before it was a domestic process. So it's also an European idea that the law is just a tradition, and the tradition will make the law which is not written, and it's a tradition which should be respected. It's also an idea from European conservatism, but from the early 19th century.
So Putin's traditional values will be new.
Could be.
Was based on law.
Against this idea. Right? Joseph de Maistre was against the revolution, he was against this idea of
You're speaking about the best.
I think I want to add, the last year in Russia, the most often taught phrase was everybody to France, law to enemies.
Oh yeah.
Everybody is
The law for the
For
law.
that.
No, but to France, everything. To everybody, to enemies.
To enemy the law.
I think we are reading now. Thank you very much. It was absolutely
Thank you.
wonderful.
Thank you for all of you. That was great. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Great discussion.
And thank you, everybody.
And thank you, everybody online.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye. Bye. Hey.